morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on managing diversity in the workplace. Before we start, let's just introduce ourselves. So I'm Sue Watson, the HR Operations Manager, and together with Victoria Templeton, who's our HR Knowledge Manager, we shall be your presenters today. Our team will also be in the background to help resolve any technical problems you may have. Hopefully not, but just in case. We will be recording the webinar today, so it will be available to you afterwards, and we'll also provide a copy of the slides for you to access. Before we look at how inequality exists throughout the employment life cycle, we first need to understand what it is. We will then look at the moral and business case for having a diversity policy and strategy before we then look at what inequality can occur throughout the employment life cycle. Finally, we will look at actions to build a diverse and inclusive workplace. As always, we will encourage you to ask questions. We have put you all on mute because there are so many attendees today. Having said that, we do want to hear your questions. So we encourage you to ask them using the chat panel as you go. So you all should have something like this. If you pop your question in there and send it to us. If it's technical, because you're having technical challenges, the team will have a look at it for you. If it's to do with the webinar content, then Victoria and I will have a look at responding to that at the end. So diversity and inclusion is about recognising that we all have many great things in common, but at the same time, we have many great differences that sets us apart from each other. In the world of work, everybody should have the right to equal access to employment, equal pay and access to training and development. This webinar will look at how inequality through the employment life cycle can exist even without us realising. We look to share our thoughts on how we can focus on tackling inequality at work. As always, we want to make this session as interactive as we would normally at our physical events, so we'll be running a series of polls throughout the session as well. When we have a poll, it will appear on your screen and you just select the answer that is appropriate to you. Please note, to be able to participate in the polls, you will need to ensure your screen is not in full screen mode. As for some reason known only to GoToWebinar, it doesn't work in full screen mode. So before we start, we have 3 short polls for you just to get you warmed up and to help us understand the people who have joined us today. So our first poll, I'll just load that up for you, is who has a diversity policy in place? So this is just a simple yes or no answer at the moment. Just give a few more seconds for the rest of you to vote. Okay, I'm going to close that poll and I'll share the results with you. So as you can see, 73% of you said yes, you do, and 27% of you don't have a diversity policy. That's a good start. So if I ask our next poll, and that one is, who has performance objectives in relation to diversity in your organisation? So who have got performance objectives that have been set in relation to diversity? I'll close that poll now and I'll share the results with you. So we have 88% of you don't have performance objectives in relation to diversity. It's another interesting statistic. So I'll hide that one and move on to our final one in this section. And that is, do you monitor diversity in the workplace? I'll just launch that one for you. close that poll. So we have 56% of you do monitor diversity, but 44% don't. So that's another interesting statistic. So at that point, I will hand over to Victoria, who will continue with the webinar for you. So I'll just close this one now for you.
Thank you, Sue. And I'll just thank you. And good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning for our webinar. So as Sue kindly set out a moment ago, we're going to look at, what diversity inclusion is all about, think about what the moral and business case is, look at inequality and how it's affecting the employee life cycle, or where we're seeing it within the employee life cycle. And then we're going to look at a number of actions that we can take to make a more inclusive place of work. So first of all, diversity is about recognising that we all have many great things in common, but we also have many great differences that sets us all apart from each other. And so inclusion is all about ensuring that everybody has the same right to equal access to employment, equal pay, access to training, and of course development, and also not to be discriminated against either directly, indirectly, or to suffer harassment or victimisation. So in understanding diversity and inclusion, it is also essential to be aware of what's called unconscious bias. So an unconscious bias is a learned stereotype that are automatically unintentional or deeply ingrained within our beliefs, but they have the ability to affect our behaviour. And sometimes it can all be very innocent. So I've got a couple of examples here just to illustrate what we mean in practice about unconscious bias. So for example, in general, if you're stuck in a car park, you've got a flat tyre, it's probably more likely you're going to approach a man rather than a woman if you needed assistance with getting that tyre fixed. Another example of an unintentional and unconscious bias is perhaps, you're in a supermarket and there's a lost child wandering around, but you'd in general most likely look to seek out the child's mother rather than the child's father. So they're just very straightforward, general sort of examples to illustrate the unconsciousness around our behaviours and our approaches. But of course, unconscious bias can be problematic when it crosses into the workplace. So what we find is that recruitment is probably the most likely area where it manifests itself, whether it's, your recruitment decisions, promotional decisions internally. But it can also influence other areas of people management, such as development, pay, and performance management. So just to give you a couple of examples, but in the context of work, one example could be that a belief is held that foreign workers will not have a good enough understanding of English to complete the job and is therefore not selected. But clearly that's not automatically the case. Or another example is a newly married job applicant is not selected for a post. There's a belief that they're likely to want to take a period of maternity leave fairly soon. So clearly these aren't necessarily true, but even if this was an innocently held unconscious belief by that recruitment manager, then it will have some significant implications for recruitment decisions. And bearing all of that in mind, it's important to look at actually the moral case and business case for why it's important to have a diversity policy in place. So ensuring everyone is treated equally and fairly is absolutely the right thing to do. Putting aside any legal responsibilities for the moment, let's just look at how some groups of the working population are treated. So I just want to run through some statistics that we know about. So the first area that is based on a report that came out in 2019 by the Equality Commission, and it was called Is Britain Fairer? It found that young, disabled, Pakistani, Bangladeshi and Muslim people have consistently higher unemployment. It found that black people were the most likely to be employed in low-paid occupations. Those of a religion had a lower employment rate to those without. And 1 in 10 FTSE 100 executive directors is a woman. And it also found that 77% of mothers reported having a negative or possibly discriminatory experience during pregnancy, maternity leave, or on their return. You then have a lot of government data that's available. So we've got a report that was published in October last year. It shows that 77% of white people are employed compared to 65% of people from all ethnic groups combined. It's showing that 51% of employment rate for disabled people compared to an 81% employment rate for non-disabled. And in every ethnic group, employment was higher for men than women. We then have the Chartered Institute of Personal Development. They've published a report addressing the barriers to BAME employees' career progression. So BAME is Black, Asian and minority ethnic. And it's found that they're more likely than those from a white British background to say discrimination is a problem. Indian, Pakistani and Bangladeshi employees said that a lack in role models and people like me is a progression barrier. And only 45% of BAME employees said they were satisfied with the training they receive in their current organisation. And almost 50% of BAME employees said they feel they need to censor how much they tell their colleagues about themselves and their personal lives, compared to 37% of white British employees. And then interestingly, there's a study that was published last year by GEM, Growth, Equal Opportunities, Migration and Markets. It showed that ethnic minorities needed to send 60% more applications in order to receive as many callbacks as the majority group. And that study involved the group applying for over 3,000 jobs and randomly varying the minority background of fictitious job applicants. But the skills, qualifications and work experience remained the same. And that figure, 60%, is actually really staggering. Of course, we want to do right by people and we want to treat everybody fairly and with respect. But apart from the moral case for focusing on diversity and inclusion, there is also a legal responsibility. And where employers do not conform to their legal responsibilities, then of course it can become costly. So I just wanted to put some context around this and show you a table that illustrates awards that have been made at an employment tribunal. This is looking at a period from April 2018 through to March 2019. And what you'll see here is you've got your age and disability discrimination claims, which have seen the by far the highest average awards made. And of course, with discrimination claims, there's no cap. And the Equality Act 2010 is the legislation that protects people from discrimination, victimisation and harassment. And just as a reminder for everybody, those protected characteristics are age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion and belief, sex and sexual orientation. So I'm going to hand over to Sue. We've got another number of polls that we'd like to do just to explore everybody's experience or practice in regards to diversity.
Thank you, Victoria. So the first one of these is diversity led from the top of your organisation? I'm just launching that one for you. Interesting to see how the statistics change as people vote. Nearly there. I think everybody's voted now, so I'll close that poll and share it with you. So there we have 57% of you no and 43% yes. Okay. Slightly closer than some of them.
Yeah.
And we'll just move on to the second question in this series. So we have, who takes overall responsibility for diversity in your organisation? So I've just launched that one. Okay. A few more coming in. Let's close that one now and share those results. Well, the majority is HR. I guess there's no surprise there.
Yeah.
I'll just share our final poll in this section. So, do you have a diversity committee? Okay, close that one. Share those results. So the majority don't, but there's quite a significant number
Okay.
do.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's good. Okay,
Interesting.
that's very
Anyway.
interesting. Yeah.
Okay, I'll hand back
Thank
to
you,
you.
Sue.
Just hide that for you.
Lovely, thank you. So we're going to look at inequality and in particular the employee life cycle. Despite the Equality Act 2010, we unfortunately know, as the data that I've just gone through, inequality is still prevalent throughout the employee life cycle. You know, and everybody should have the right to equal access to employment, equal pay, access to training, etc. And for this reason, it's fundamental that an organisation has a clear strategy on how it approaches diversity and inclusion. And so we're going to now spend some time looking at how inequality takes place, whether unintentional or not, but just to see how it manifests itself. So when looking at recruitment, inequality in the workplace can occur because of ineffective recruitment practices. Here are just a few examples of where unconscious bias can occur as well as discrimination. So, for example, you have an Egyptian student applying for a part-time job but is declined because it was felt they would not fit in with the rest of the staff because the rest of the staff are English. There's another example where a BAME employee applied for an internal role within the company sales team, but they weren't shortlisted for interview because they're typically quite a member of the team, and the recruitment manager assumed they spoke limited English and so would not be suitable to that telephone-based role. And then you've got an example where a foreign national moved to the UK 4 years ago to attend university, and on graduating they're seeking their first full-time job, but on applying they're turned down because they had not been a UK resident for 5 years. So there are all some examples of how recruitment can see inequality. You've then got onboarding. So once you've appointed somebody and you're managing the early days of somebody's employment, again, unconscious bias and discrimination can creep in. So here's an example of where an employee with dyslexia, they're not progressing in their role as well as perhaps another new colleague who joined at the same time but doesn't have dyslexia. But the business end their probation due to underperformance. Or you've got an older new employee who's struggling in using the company's IT systems and is viewed as old school in how they carry out their role. Their probation is finished, and on the basis of that they're being too slow and not up to using the latest systems and technology in the organisation. We then have employee development. So we know from the data that we have that ethnic minorities are less likely to hold jobs as managers, directors and senior officials than those who are white. We also know that structural historical bias does prevent ethnic minorities from progressing in their careers. And we know that black employees with degrees earn 23% roughly less than a white employee. And we know that only 45% of BAME employees reported being satisfied with training that they received in their current organisation. So the stats and the data is there around how people are not being treated equally in the same way, depending on their characteristic. What we mean by retention is it's a broad range of work that contributes to how you are able to retain your members of staff. And so it's about how the employee is managed in the workplace and then the steps that as an employer you take to ensure that retaining the staff is fairly through their policies and practices. So as I said a moment ago, we know, for example, when it comes to pay, that the black employees with a degree earns less than a white employee. We know that black people were the most likely to be employed in low paid occupations, and that we've also got some data from the Ministry of Justice in a 2018 report where we saw that there was an increase of 17% in race claims and a 24% increase in disability claims. Unconscious bias and discrimination can also appear when managing separation, i.e. the ending of a relationship, and whether that's by the employee or the employer. And some examples that we can see is where perhaps somebody is resigning because they're subjected to being having inappropriate comments made or jokes being made about their age, race, religion, etc. We also see discrimination claims and resignations on the back of employees receiving certain race terms being put to them in terms of slang terms or code words. And of course, unfairly dismissing employees, such as those who are older, those of an ethnic background, or someone with disability, you know, can lead to obviously discrimination and unfair dismissal claims. Here's, we've got some interesting data in terms of separation. So ACAS produced their annual reports, and what they're saying is in the 2018-19 period, there was a 40% increase in their cases that involved tribunals. They also saw a 20% increase in early conciliation, and they found that the pay or pay-related matters was the top cause for those. You then look at the employment tribunal statistics themselves, in particular the period July to September last year, and they themselves have seen a 23% increase in claims, i.e. when an actual ET1 has been submitted, 17% increase in religion or belief claims, and 21% increase in age claims. So we know there still exists discrimination and bias for people of those protected characteristics. So we've got one further poll here. Sue, do you want to pull up a poll for everybody?
Yeah. So this one's asking if you carry out diversity training amongst your staff. So I'm just going to launch that poll. Just give a few more seconds.
Okay.
I think most have voted now. I'm to close the poll, share the results with you. So 69% don't carry out diversity training.
Right, okay.
It's actually one of the most regular requests we get for training is for some kind of diversity training, often on the back of a case that's been raised or a manager that they've had some trouble with, so they decide to implement training across the whole organisation. So it is one of the most common ones we do, actually.
Yeah, and I think a tribunal would see that it's an essential part of managing people, and it's about protecting your organisation as well as the moral side of it, but protecting your organisation from mitigating against any discriminatory actions taking place in your workplace. But that's an interesting, thank you for that.
Okay,
so
thank you.
I think what we'll look at now is around the actual practical steps that we can look at taking to build that inclusive workplace, because this is the sort of key. This is how we can move forward and eradicate some of those stats that we've just gone through. So here you'll see the employee life cycle, and central to that is the company strategy. So first and foremost, an inclusive workplace begins at the top. Unless you have that buy-in from the top, you're going to struggle in being able to implement and drive forward change. And it's necessary for having that diversity strategy and having a set of values to recognise that differences are okay. There are differences in the workplace, and it's about how we embrace those differences. So diversity must be led from the top down and have CEO sponsorship. It's really important, as well as part of company strategy, to raise awareness on equality and educate your workforce on the role that they play as individuals in eradicating inequality and discrimination, and then monitor those systems and practices. So that's just touching on that training piece. I mean, Sue talked about a moment ago. It's absolutely fundamental and critical that that awareness exists in your workplace. And I know for a lot of people, diversity is sitting within the HR remit, but actually it needs to be embraced by all, the CEO, all senior management, all employees individually. You know, we all have responsibilities. Another part of the strategy is about exploring whether your current policies, procedures and practices align to the company's diversity policy, and that they are underpinned by principles that essentially celebrate and encourage those differences. So perhaps for some of you, you may need to go away and just do that audit to see how your policies are working in practice and how effective they are. Have your policies, procedures and practices that actively celebrate and encourage difference, and have a clearly developed strategy that looks at the whole employment life cycle and which clearly communicates your organisation's intentions, but that it's also transparent for everybody. And finally, we would always suggest adopting that zero tolerance for inequality, and that should be stated in all your policies and all the practices, that all the processes that you put into practice carries that theme through, that, you know, it is unacceptable and there's no tolerance for it. It's really important to monitor trends and decisions to understand what is happening in your workplace, such as looking at the makeup of your job applicants. Look at the decisions that you're making in your employee relations environment, such as your disciplinary sanctions, your grievance conclusions, and monitor the ethnicity of your workforce. It's also important to critically appraise your own organisational culture, because that's how about change can happen and move forward. And actively encourage employees' voice to facilitate change. There's no point doing it on your own in isolation, either as a HR professional, or if you're a senior manager, or if you're the CEO. You've actually got to all work together and seek the employee's voice to help facilitate that. And it's important to have a strategy that addresses unconscious bias. As well as incorporating company-wide diversity training, whether that's your company induction through to line management training, and evaluate the effectiveness, so you have evidence should you need it if you're at a tribunal. Because if you are on the stand at a tribunal and you're having to demonstrate that you have not discriminated somebody because of their race when you dismiss somebody, it's very likely you're going to need to back that up and show evidence of where you've dismissed other people that aren't black, and so you've had consistent treatment in applying your policies. And whilst names and things can be redacted, you will be, in theory, required to present data to evidence that you're not discriminatory in how you make your decisions. So going back to the employee life cycle, recruitment obviously is at the very beginning. Where we tend to see most unconscious bias is at the recruitment stage. And inequality in the workplace is very often because of ineffective recruitment practices. So reviewing your current policy and practices is going to be crucial for eliminating bias and discrimination. So make it mandatory for line managers to receive that diversity training before they take an active role in your recruitment. Make sure you review all your person specifications to ensure there's no practice that can indirectly discriminate anybody, whether it's to do with their age, gender, race, nationality. And advertise in a wide range of places using a variety of mediums, so you're reaching out to a diverse group as possible, and not just limiting who you reach out to. And of course, be sure not to inadvertently discriminate by requiring application forms to be completed by hand, for example. That could be discriminatory for those whose first language is not English, or even for anybody that has dyslexia. So just bear in mind what stipulations you're asking as part of your recruitment process. And of course, standardise your recruitment process and use structured skill-based questionings in your interview arena, because that's your best way of avoiding bias and discrimination. If you've got that preset standard set of questions that you put to every candidate, then it's lessening the opportunity for any inadvertently bias or discrimination to come out from that process. And there's another way in which you can help to eradicate inequality, and that's by carrying out blind screening of applications. So essentially you're getting the applications in but purely with their skills and experience on that application, so you're hiding the name and the personal details, and so you're purely looking at it from the job and the capability perspective. And consider whether a recruitment strategy that allows for positive action in line with the Equality Act. Now, this is something that must be used with caution, because it is only very for unique circumstances, but in theory, under the Equality Act, employers can take positive, proportionate steps to help remove the hurdles faced by sections of the community that are underrepresented in its workforce. So, as I said, there are strict conditions. We would urge caution with it, but as long as an employer has to have a clear objective in place for reducing the number of underrepresented in the workforce, then in theory you could look at positive action where you have two scoring candidates who have equal scored in your process at the very end of the process, but you've got no way of making that decision based on that. Then if there's a genuine proportionate business case for why you would take in the somebody from the underrepresented group, then that could be a fair selection made. But as I said, it is with caution. Then you've got your job adverts, so just make sure you review those for gendered or other biased wording. Ensure hiring managers understand provisions for reasonable adjustments and are confident in being able to apply those. And examine your recruitment data to understand how diverse the talent pool is at each stage of the selection process. So onboarding and development, I would say, are very closely aligned, so we'll look at these together. I would suggest that having a probation and performance process that accommodates employees with disabilities is going to be essential. Have a standardised company-wide process in place for how you manage training needs, and establish a clear process that works alongside your performance appraisal process, linking in with the training needs that are relevant to the objectives and the performance of that role. And if we look at retention, how you look at focusing on retaining your employees and keeping that diverse workforce, then make sure that you have a transparent reward strategy that's objective rather than subjective, and have a reward strategy that benchmarks both externally and internally, and look at your pay gap reporting to see where there may be issues for any underrepresented groups. And what's also important is to actually undertake a review of salaries annually. I don't know if everybody does this, but it doesn't mean to say you have to give increases each year, but certainly commit to undertaking a review of salaries, because that just makes that sense check that everybody is on a fair representative salary and linked to their role. And ensure all your employees and line managers receive diversity training and support better quality people management. I would say that it's really important to record and monitor employee relations activity to ensure that equal treatment and consistency of your formal policies is happening, such as your disciplinary sanctions, your grievance outcomes that you're giving. As I said, you could be faced at a tribunal with a claim of discrimination for how you've dismissed somebody or you've not upheld a grievance. So it's important to monitor your decision making and make sure decisions are consistent, because worst case scenario, if you're on the stand, then like I said a moment ago, you will have to present evidence to demonstrate that you are treating everybody consistently and fairly in line with the circumstances. And I would absolutely say act thoroughly and quickly on claims of discrimination. This shows your commitment to how seriously you're taking it, but actually it's about nipping it in the bud and taking that relevant, appropriate action at the time. And audit the decision making of your formal processes, like I said a moment ago, so you're not disproportionately not upholding grievances or awarding disciplinary actions to certain groups of the workplace. And I don't know if a lot of you may know, but there's government financial support available. So seek that where you employ disabled employees. So we have the Access to Work scheme. So where you do have employees with disabilities, make sure you seek out that government financial support, because you could get a contribution towards the cost of any equipment that you need to put in place to help support that disability. And in order to ensure that you're managing somebody with disabilities fairly, then it's about exhausting and looking into all reasonable adjustments. So make sure that you do look out for external government financial support to help you as you need. And of course, review flexible working policies, take up, and if flexible working is available but not used, then explore what the barriers could be. And ensure job design allows flexibility, and think creatively about how jobs can be flexible, as well as whether you can offer things like flexi time, part-time working, or even if job share is feasible. And this probably aligns very much to working parents or even employees with caring responsibilities, because the demands and challenges that they will have, they may more likely to be wanting some kind of flexible working arrangement. And we know that more women than men are going to want part-time working. So to help that inclusive, diverse workforce, then look at your job design and see how you can accommodate that flexible working. And to bring us in the final area of the employee life cycle, and some areas we can think about implementing, then it's separation, and that's the ending of the employment relationship, whether this is by you or by the employee. So we would recommend implementing exit interviews. They're really invaluable. They're really beneficial for understanding actually the reason for people leaving. And monitor those reasons for leaving, because it could show you trends, themes, it could show you hotspots in your organisation where there perhaps may be some challenges that you then need to address. And review cases of sudden resignations, especially any that arise on the back of grievances or disciplinary processes, you know, because you want to, it's about having that diverse workforce and that inclusivity. And if people feel that they have to resign on the back of something, then it's really important to understand what's happening and why. And review your dismissal data to identify any disproportionate decisions to dismiss from any group of the workforce. So I'm going to hand over to Sue just to see if we've had any questions or comments come in, and see what we can take from those questions.
Sorry, hello Victoria. Sorry, I'm just having a technical challenge. I think hopefully you can see the right slide now again. Yes, we've had a couple of questions in, if I can ask you.
Okay.
So one of them was, what happens if they've been monitoring a process and they find an issue in how one manager is making decisions under their process? Actually, how should they handle it?
So in just a certain part of the business? Well, that's a really good question. And I think the fact that you're monitoring is really positive, because you're wanting to find out the effectiveness of your policies. I guess there's no point having a policy without assessing how effective it is. So don't be afraid of uncovering those concerns and acting on those. So it's then about how you manage what you found out. So it may be that one individual may need training or further training, or in fact through any investigations you look into on the issue, then it could be there may be some undertones of bias or prejudice towards a certain group of workforce, and therefore you are obliged to act. So, you know, in theory, it could be down the training route, or it could be through a disciplinary route, depending on the severity and what you find. I think if you've got good systems, monitoring systems in place, act on what you uncover, and if you need to amend any working practice or policy where needed, do so. And you know, a tribunal won't criticise you if you you know, they absolutely want you to monitor the effectiveness of your policies, and they will look favourably on you if you're taking action on what you uncover. And it's you have to obviously mitigate by them putting steps in place to prevent it from happening moving forward. You might have an isolated event that you may then have to explain at a tribunal, but you then need to also, in explaining yourself, go through what actions you've taken to assure it doesn't happen again, whether that's using a disciplinary framework, whether there's a grievance, or training, like I say. But that's a really, really good question, and you know, it can come up in pockets of the organisation. It's, you know, it can occur in isolation, but just don't be afraid of tackling it and addressing it. And remember, you know, it's about having that zero tolerance to discrimination and unconscious bias.
Thank you. Another question is around policy. So what kind of things would you include in a diversity policy?
Okay, I think on the zero tolerance piece, it's about setting out your commitment, your stance on how you consider the whole subject of diversity inclusivity. So having your statement up front, and what's really going to be essential is making absolute clear that everybody has a responsibility, starting from the top, the CEO, right to the you know, first level in the organisation, and it's setting out what those responsibilities are. So you know, reporting any incidences that they might see where they feel perhaps discrimination may be going on, and taking responsibility for their own actions. So be absolutely clear on setting out the responsibilities that everybody has. As well as including your commitment to training. Training is going to be essential, because if you are, and I keep talking about tribunals, but if you are in front of a tribunal, they will absolutely expect you to be evidencing what measures you put in place to train your workforce and your employees. So there is a very much an expectation that employers have training in place that mitigates and tries to prevent from discrimination and bias from happening. So cover off your approach to that, and how you manage and monitor the performance of your diversity is also really important for going into a policy. And perhaps any particular, because I think because of the data that we know and where the key areas are, it's generally, you know, your recruitment and training and development opportunities. You know, you could focus on incorporating areas on your commitment to those in your policy as well, and how the steps you take to make sure that everybody is treated fairly in those two particular areas of the life cycle. But good question, and definitely something worth, you know, essential to have in place, a diversity policy.
And I think that we've had another question in, and I think the policy and the training might be the answer to this one. So somebody works in a small company with a completely white workforce, and they're wondering how they can broach the subject of recruitment diversity with their manager, who's the head of the office, and how it can be addressed in future hiring. So I guess this is all down to training, if you can, across the company. If there's more than one recruitment manager, maybe that would help, because if one person does all the hiring, they do all the shortlisting, they do all the interviewing, and they make the decisions, it's quite hard. In a small organisation, that's often how it has to happen, isn't it? But
absolutely, training, and it's that awareness, isn't it? And I think if you're not necessarily in a place where you've got your policy or you've got training in place and it's sort of not on the agenda, then it's about bringing it to the agenda. And I think if I don't know if this person works in HR. If they are, then it's about just trying to build a business case. You know, we've got lots of stats to say that actually it still exists and prevalent, and so put some form of business case to your MD, your CEO, to actually argue about having the benefits and moral need for having diversity, and put forward some of your proposals as to what you want to do. So to then over time, it's not going to be a quick win, is it? You're going to, you know, if you've got that all white workforce, it's how you look at your base it on your business context, your environment, look at your recruitment methods, look at how you manage pay and development. And I think it starts with recruitment very much, as to how you can draw in applicants from all backgrounds. And so I guess look at where you're recruiting and your methods, but training is essential for awareness. But yeah, I think going back to the stats, sometimes if you put in a business case, or when you are putting a business case in, it very much stats and data is the thing that to go with, to actually hit home. Actually, this is a situation, and actually, you know, we will benefit in terms of morally and performance-wise as a business by having a diverse workforce.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's all the questions that we've covered now. So if you do think of any other questions as you go away thinking about this and pondering on all the things we've raised, do send them through to us. If you send it through to our inquiries it will get to Victoria and I through the grapevine. So and we will answer them afterwards for you if we can. We also would welcome any feedback. This helps us to develop future webinars, and also if you've got any suggested topics you would like us to cover, we're always welcome that as well. We have got a programme coming up. We've planned a couple in August, one in August at the moment. There will be another one coming up on the Kickstart scheme once we've had more information from the government about it. But at the moment we've planned future of work, new employment practices. So this is looking at all the flexible working options and what that might mean. That's on the 13th of August, and we've got one in September on conflict resolution. So this will look at handling and managing informal and formal grievances, and we've also got an experienced mediator doing a presentation as part of that as well. So that should be a really interesting one in September. And we've got we're about to post our October and November ones up as well in the next week or two, so keep your eyes open for that. If you want to be informed as to when we've got new webinars coming up and all the news as it happens, then you can sign up for our newsletters on our newsletter sign up page on the main website. We also keep an archive of all our recorded webinars, which you can watch again on demand or share them with your colleagues. There's a whole range of topics from furlough through to flexible working, recruitment, managing home workers and everything in between. And we've obviously got a history of Brexit and GDPR workshops as well, all on the webinar library. So finally, can I say thank you to Victoria for leading us this webinar today. Very interesting topic and very topical one as well. And thank you to all of you for attending. We hope you found it useful, and we look forward to welcome you again on our future webinars. Thank you.
Thank you.